for the ones, maybe some of the newer ones that are here that don't know, we do a cappella praise and worship once a month, I think toward the end of the month. So yeah, I'm glad everybody's here. We're struggling just a little bit this morning. We're missing some of our folks because they're sick, and some of them aren't here. And us that are here, we're struggling with our voices just a little bit. So if we sound off just a little bit, just take it as a joyful noise to the Lord. And if you have healthy voices, make sure to let it out this morning. First song we're singing this morning is Lord, We Come Before Thee Now.
Lord, we come before Thee now, at Thy feet we humbly bow. Oh, do not our suit disdain. Shall we seek Thee, Lord, in vain? Shall we seek Thee, Lord, in vain? Lord, on Thee our souls depend. In compassion now descend. Fill our hearts with Thy rich grace. Tune our lips to sing Thy praise. Tune our lips to sing Thy praise. In Thine own appointed way, now we seek Thee, here we stay. Lord, we know not how to go, till a blessing Thou bestow. Till a blessing Thou bestow. Grant that all may see and find Thee a God supremely kind. Heal the sick, the captive free. Let us all rejoice in Thee. Let us all rejoice in Thee. Come, Thou Almighty King, help us Thy name to sing. Help us to praise, Father all glorious, o'er all victorious. Come and reign over us, Ancient of Days. Come, Thou incarnate Word, gird on Thy mighty sword, our prayers attend. Come and Thy people bless, and give Thy word success, and let Thy righteousness on us descend. Come, Holy Comforter, Thy sacred witness bear. In this glad hour, Thou who Almighty art,
children come up for a children's song. Sing, I have decided to follow Jesus. You guys,
I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. The cross before me, the world behind me. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back, no turning back. Though none go with me, still I will follow. Though none go with me, still I will follow. Though none go with me, still I will follow. No turning back, no turning back. Oh, glory, glory, oh, hallelujah. Oh, glory, glory, oh, hallelujah. Oh, glory, glory, oh, hallelujah. No turning back, no turning back.
thank you. You can go sit back down again.
I was in sin's prison, oh so dark and cold, just a lost sheep wandering from God's eternal fold. Then the door swung open, Jesus said to me, I have signed your pardon, now you may go free. Jesus signed my pardon, this I surely know. Took my place at Calvary, now I don't have to go. All my life I give him, he gave his for me. When he signed my pardon there on Calvary. Since the Savior led me from that awful place, I can hear the angels sing, they sing Amazing Grace. I know I was pardoned from my sin and shame. Now I join them singing glory to his name. Jesus signed my pardon, this I surely know. Took my place on Calvary, now I won't have to go. All my life I give him, he gave his for me. When he signed my pardon there on Calvary. Life is now worth living since he set me free. I'm so glad he was willing to save a wretch like me. Now I own a mansion, not a prison wall. For Jesus signed my pardon, Jesus paid it all. Jesus signed my pardon, this I surely know. Took my place on Calvary, now I don't have to go. All my life I give him, he gave his for me. When he signed my pardon there on Calvary. There is beyond the azure blue a God concealed from human sight. He tinted skies with heavenly hue and framed the world with his great might. There is a God, he is alive, in him we live and we survive. From the star God created man, he is our God, the great I am. There was a long, long time ago a God whose voice the prophets heard. He is the God that we should know, who speaks from his inspired word. There is a God, he is alive, in him we live and we survive. From dust our God created man, he is our God, the great I am. Secure is life from mortal mind. God holds the germ within his hand. Though men may search, they cannot find, for God alone does understand. There is a God, he is alive, in him we live and we survive. From dust our God created man, he is our God, the great I am. Our God, whose Son upon a tree alive was willing there to give, that he from sin might set man free, and evermore with him could live. There is a God, he is alive, in him we live and we survive. From dust our God created man, he is our God, the great I am. Thank you. You may be seated, and we'll turn the time back over to Marcus.
All right, there's children's church today, so the children can feel free to go out. I think Andrews and who else? Somebody's helping. Jimmy's are helping. That, thank you. All right. I did not know, I struggle a little bit because I think generally our Sunday morning services should be built around Scripture. But like I told you, and particularly since my illnesses, I have a little more trouble dividing my brain into two pieces. And so to study a passage in Mark, and I just couldn't do it. And I thought, well, they'll get a better experience if I just keep going and keep talking about history. And we don't have a lot of visitors here this morning, so I'm grateful that we are just kind of keeping going the way we are. Now, I just also realized that Mike Slabaugh was on to preach in 2 weeks, and he had asked to trade with me, so I'm not sure. I'll talk to Chris about how we handle in 2 weeks as well. But I want us to, okay, so we kind of set the stage. We were thinking about, and by the way, lest you think this isn't spiritual, it is. You stop and think about what the large percentage of the Old Testament is. It is a story of how God called his people, Israel, out of places into other places. And the mess and the problems of Israel are, they're humans as we are, and so humanity struggles. Their journeys. Thank you. Now on. When we look at our lives and our people's journeys, we see sometimes the messiness of the divisions, the brokenness. And unless we're honest about who we are and who they were, we'll never get ahead in life. So I'm going to talk about immigration, particularly the immigration of coming to America. This is one of my favorite pieces of poetry, is a set of works by T.S. Eliot. This is from a poem, a portion of that called Little Gidding. He says, "We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time." Does anyone know where this place is? It's actually not. It's between Mount Hope and Winesburg. It's the place I was born. The place my father was born. The place my grandmother was born and died. When we went to Yale, one of the gifts that one of my professors gave is he said, you should just, I want you to write a paper. He said, we have way too much academic work out there. Write a story and use your imagination. Think about could have been. Try to write human experience. If you have to start with the weather, you start with the weather. Another professor said, any good book always starts, it was a cold and rainy day. Because we all know what it feels like, or a hot and sunny day. We all know what that feels like. It engages your audience. Stories engage people. And he gave me a gift, and I was working on, so I wanted to write about, I was particularly interested in what makes people move across the Atlantic Ocean and come to America. My people, our people, the group of us sitting here, our people. What made them decide to come to America? They knew the risks. Don't kid yourself. They knew that it was a dangerous journey, but it's also a hopeful journey. And in the middle of that process, now, when we had left to go to Yale, I went to see my grandmother. I am the oldest grandchild. I have 74 first cousins on that side, and I'm the oldest. And my grandmother and I had always had a special relationship. This is in 2013. My grandfather had died 20 years before that in 1993 or 4. So she was a widow, and she lived alone in the Doherty house at the far right side of this house, the one-level piece of this house. And she lived there. She had watched her mother and father die in that little Doherty house. And we went to see her, and I said, Grandma, we're going to move to Connecticut, and we're going to go to graduate school. You know what my grandma said? För vad vill du? Why would you want to do that? That's just what all grandmas say. By the way, I once took a professor from Ohio State when I was going to Ohio State to her house, and he said he wants to see the real Amish. So I'll take you to some real Amish. So you go in a long lane, and you go around the back, and you park up behind the house, and then you go in her back door, and you knocked on the back door, and what you did is you just simply knocked on the door, you opened it and said, Mommy, and she'd always know who it was. Oh, Marcus, come in. You know, she couldn't see the door. I don't know what. And she knew all her children and their spouses and grandchildren until the day she died by name, and their grandchildren's spouses never. She was just. So I took my professor there, Dr. Shields, and the morning we met to go, he was driving a blue Miata convertible. And he said, should I drive or do you want to? I said, you drive. I want to drive in the convertible. I waved to everybody. So we come in her driveway, and he was kind of explaining, I'd take her into her house, and Mommy, and I said, I have somebody along. She gets all, and brings, I'll make coffee. She has this Lifetime coffee pot. She put on the gas stove, and it go, and that smell would begin to invade the house. You know. By the way, when you say that, people sometimes go, because they smell the coffee. We all know what it smells like. You engage with stories. So Dr. Shields came in and introduced them. She was at her best in this. She's in her late 80s now, and she was at her best. And he said, so what were you doing? Oh, she said, I was just sitting here reading the budget. I saw this strange look cross his face. Financial paper? What is she, the budget? Oh, so I had to explain the budget to him. And we were there a few minutes, and half an hour, and she told him, he asked her about her life, and I suddenly realized that she had lived either in this house or at the other end of the farm all her years, lived in the same place, and she was very engaged with the land, the community, the neighborhood. I once asked her, when did you start sitting with the girls at church? And she said, 10 years old. So she sat, because they sit by age, she sat beside the same person for 81 years every other Sunday morning. And they didn't even really like each other. They were neighbors, And so on the way out, we laughed. We had a really good visit with her. He asked the questions that he wanted to. On the way out, Dr. Shields punches me on the shoulder and says, you set me up. I set you up. He said, no one lives like that. When we were there, her great-grandchild, opens the door between the two houses. Mommy, gross mommy, comes running over, and jumps in great-grandma's lap, and then soon she goes, and goes outside to play with the dog. And he couldn't believe. He said, no one lives like that. Yeah, that's my grandma's life. And sometimes we lose sight of the fact what a gift we have to live in the world we do. But there's a tremendous price to be paid for this, for what we have today. So I would argue that what holds the greater Holmes County community and the Amish communities together over the world, and Mennonites, is our deep historic faith that's 500 plus years old. We have had a suffering, martyred faith for 500 years. But the other thing that holds us together is our deep commitment to family. You know that we live in a bubble in Holmes County where there are more intact family units than any other place in America. There are more intact family units because in the greater American world, 50% of children live in homes that are split by divorce in some way. And even among evangelical Christians in America, it's 54%. It's higher. But yet, and we have our problems in families. Some families should be split and aren't. Okay? But there's something really powerful in that. So our deep commitment to faith, our deep commitment to our families. By the way, Amish people don't really care about my 2 degrees that I paid a great deal of money for. They want to know who my grandpa was. Monroe's Milo's Lee. Oh, yeah, you're my first cousin once removed on my mother's side. And my wife, who has roots in Kelowna, Iowa, and Wayne County, she'll elbow Narita and say, so is the other half of Holmes County. They're all, yeah, but it means something. Now, is that always healthy? No. But yet it creates a place for children to be raised that can actually hear the story of the gospel in maybe a more rich way. We need to be aware of that. So faith, family, and then this deep sense of community. So my grandma sat beside the same lady for 81 years. They fought. But she would wash feet with her regularly. And they had communion. And they tussled and fought. You know how neighborhoods do. We're humans. My grandma died. So back to my story. So we're at Yale that first semester. When we went to see Grandma, I probably realized that I probably wouldn't see her again. And I don't know how she and I knew it. She said goodbye in a different way than she ever had before when we were getting ready to move to New Haven. And she hugged me. Or I hugged her. There was hugging. And it never happened. And sure enough, in November of 2013, my father called. And I'm working on this project about immigration. I decided I want to know why our people come to America. My father called, and he said, Grandma's not well. And 3 nights later, 2 a.m. in the morning, the phone rings. And you know who it is. And sure enough, she had passed away. She died in the same room that her mother had died in, surrounded by her 12 children and their spouses. And my father said, he doesn't know how word got around in the neighborhood, but at 5:30, she died at 2 a.m. At 5:30, the neighbors started showing up, including the lady she sat beside who was still living. And this lady brought green Jell-O. And you know, green Jell-O has never tasted like it did that day, when it tasted like 80 plus years of community and togetherness, fighting and love, hope and joy. And so, in a lot of ways, the community and the world we live in is a gift. Now, it doesn't mean we worship that, or we should, but there is a tremendous price that people paid to give us what we have. Late in 2015, late in our experience at Yale, I like art, and I decided I'd start painting. And I don't know what made me paint. It's terrible, but it's my first watercolor I ever did. It's my grandparents' farm, home farm. I had a picture of it. I just finished the painting. It was drying. My mom called. And my father had fallen and was in the hospital. And she called the next day and said, Marcus, the doctors are saying if you want to see Dad alive, you have to come home now. I said, well, we could leave. She said, no, they're saying right now. And I don't know what made me do it, but I stuck this thing in my briefcase. We left in 20 minutes' time. That's the last time I've been to New Haven. Well, we visited once. And so church people went out and moved us back home. We were preparing to move back home. And I stuck this in. And we made it to Altman Hospital. My dad rallied, then lived another week and a half. He had cancer and didn't know it, and he was full of it. And I came in, he was kind of semi-conscious. And he kept saying, breathing tube, he kept trying to say something. He kept saying, home, home. I thought, home. I remembered this painting, and I went and pulled it up and hung it on the post beside his bed, and he'd point to it and said, Hemge, there's Hemge. I just want to go home. There is something in all of us that yearns for home. This place of safety, security, freedom. Now, he didn't want to go back to the home farm. He wanted to go home. Because the night before, he had seen a vision of heaven and Jesus. That's where he wanted to go. But he recognized this kind of connection to home. And thank you. And for all of us, we have that connection. But do we realize the price that was paid? So this is the world of Europe that our people lived in. And it's in this world, down at the very bottom, where the place called the Palatinate. Excuse me. The place called the Palatinate is where our people would have settled. I mean, our people. I'm literally talking about our people. And it's in the 1730s they begin to hear word. They're not allowed to own land. Remember I said that? They're tenant farmers who get pushed around. And they begin to hear, and they're not allowed to build church houses. They have to still kind of meet in private. They just don't talk about their church services. They meet in shops and houses or barns and houses. Wonder why our people still do that today, right? That's why. It's a good way to worship. There's nothing wrong with that. But they begin to hear word about this land across the Atlantic Ocean, called Pennsylvania, across the ocean. And there's this kind of circulation now. Some Mennonites had moved to America, to Philadelphia actually, as early as the 1680s and 90s, but these are progressive Mennonites from Holland and Germany. Our people began to hear about this, and they live in the Palatinate. They're good farmers. So these are pictures of the Palatinate. They're kind of a little washed out, but if you look, this is from one of my favorite places. It's called the Königsberg Castle. Now, this castle would have been standing when your ancestors lived here. They would have seen this castle. Now, to them, this is one of those places where you go and you're like, oh, how did these people build this over hundreds of years? But for our people, this would have represented something very scary and dangerous. This is the place the authorities lived. But it looks out across the valley, and it's in that valley that your people, I know your people's story. This is what I was writing about in the middle of the time my grandmother was. I was writing about. I'll talk a little more about that. And this is a village scene. They would have walked up and down these steps in this area. Now they had left their homeland. This is in Switzerland. These are the areas where the Anabaptists would have lived in Switzerland. Those steeper farming places. This is high up near Trub. This is where the Troyers and the Troyers and the Schwarzentrubers and the Millers and Yoders would have lived in the Emmental Valley at a place that's very similar to this. This is a house-barn combo. The house is on the left side where the garage is, and the barn is on the right side. Sorry, it's reversed. House is on the right side, barn is on the left. And again, this is a little village scene, but they would have gotten word about this. And in the 1730s, William Penn sends land agents, real estate developers. He needs farmers in Pennsylvania. And he sends them to go up and down the Rhine River, and they meet these German farmers who are good farmers. And they invite them to come to America, to Pennsylvania. And the enticement is there you can own your own land. Now imagine what this would have done to these people. They live in little villages, little Hofs. They call, in German, they're Hofs, Deichhof. We would say Scheierhof, Haashof. It's a little area, and families live together. I know in one particular instance where the Lamans and the Millers come from. The Lamans and the Millers are the families that I took as a case study. I wanted to find a person who was born in the Palatinate and moved to America, and then also has roots in Ohio. And I found this little girl. Her name was Magdalena Lehman. Her father's name was Benedict. She would have come from a little village, a Hof. And imagine what that would have been like the morning that your dad comes into the house at noon from working out in the fields and says, Frau, I heard about this place across the ocean called America, and you can own your own land there. Now already they're facing this pressure because what happens, they develop the farms, they have children, the children grow up, and there's no place for the children to farm. Nothing for them to do. And because of their faith, they're sometimes pushed off of those places. And they say, oh, Dad, that's so exciting. Well, yeah. And the Lamans decide to go with this little 7-year-old daughter named Magdalena that I studied. Now, I found there's so few records, but I found these records. And just imagine the feelings, the hopefulness. Hope, something better. We can raise our families in freedom there. Our children will be able to grow, and we'll be able to worship together. They also promised them the freedom to practice their religion with no restrictions, and they wouldn't have to join the military. And think about the hope, the desire that's there. But every time they talk about it, Magdalena notices that her grandma is kind of quiet. And the closer they come to the spring of 1737, when they're getting ready to leave, she notices that oftentimes when they talk about it, Grandma cries. And she realizes that Grandma's not going. Think about the feelings of this hope and this sadness. And in many cases, in most cases, it is young families with children who decide to come to America. And by the way, there's only about 300 Amish people who immigrate to America. And all of you come from those 300. Have some connection to those 300. Now, a few came scattered a little later, and we married in. But the Swiss Amish, the Hilties, what names, the Schwatzel from Davis County and Allen County, Indiana, and even Wayne County, the Mennonites in Wayne County, Nussbaums and those people, Nuenswanders, those came later. This is the Millers, the Yoders, the Stoltzfuses, the Kings, the Lapps. There's only about 300 total who came. So we need new genetics occasionally. Anyway, your father's last name. Pate. Pate is there. Oh, we're all together in this. And so think about they're getting ready to leave and this kind of hopefulness of the future, and the sadness. And by the way, they knew the risk. We have become aware that they knew the risk of what the journey would take. The average life expectancy of a child, 7 years old and younger, to survive the Atlantic journey is 50%. A baby, 1-year-old and younger, only 10% survived the journey to America. And many adults died as well. But they decided to leave. And there's traditions in Germany, in these little villages, when people leave, they treat it like death because they'll never see them again. Imagine that feeling that morning when you get ready to go and grandma's crying. And the Germans had a tradition of singing when they feel sadness. Imagine the singing. Actually, one account that's not even Amish. It's not an Amish village or Amish families leaving, but German families immigrating. The Amish just joined the regular immigration of German families coming to America. There's one account of a village where they sang from 7 a.m. in the morning until 2 o'clock in the afternoon before they could kind of tear apart from each other. But they did, and they left. They traveled by wagon to the Rhine River and went on the Rhine. These are scenes along the Rhine that I took in 2017. Lots of vineyards, and some of these buildings, including the tower there on the left, would have been standing when Magdalena and her family. By the way, the Lamans joined 10 other Amish families: Kaufmans, Millers, Masts, and Yoders. It's the largest group that goes at one time, 11 Amish families. With them is a young Amish bishop named Hans Kaufman, John Kaufman. And we're very fortunate he kept a little diary recording the dates and stuff when they left. And in the 1980s, somebody found it in an old family Bible, and it records it. I'll talk a little bit about that. These are scenes along. As they would have traveled, they would have seen these castles. And Magdalena, being the typical 7-year-old, would have asked her father, Dad, what is that? He said, that's a Schloss. Schloss means castle or dungeon, lock. It's a place, and she would have remembered the stories that she heard when the preacher got up to preach about the martyr's mirror and how those Schlosses swallowed up her people in the past, where they died. They would have floated through Cologne. This is the cathedral at Cologne, Germany. This is one of my favorite places in the world. But when Magdalena and her family would have seen that tower coming up in the distance, they would have felt fear, because that place persecutes her ancestors. But they get close to Rotterdam, and this is a picture of the sailing ships, the harbors in Europe during this time, including Rotterdam, where these 11 Amish families joined. And Magdalena would have said that one day. She would have said it took them 39 days, by the way, to raft north on the Rhine, on rafts. And the Lehman family traveled with one trunk. They had 4 children under 7 years old. Magdalena is the oldest. 4 children under 7 years old and one trunk. I often ask students, school kids, what do you think they took with them? They said clothing. And I gently correct them. Most of our ancestors would have had 2 sets of clothing, good and work. And they wore them all because they didn't want to take space up in the trunk. Now, they may have taken a wedding dress or something like that, but we know they took old Bibles, their family Bibles. We have family Bibles at Behold who came with these people, Osborns that came with them on the journey to America. Seedlings, they took seeds. They took vine cuttings from their grapevines, apple seeds, because they knew they'd farm. One trunk, though. Mom and Dad have to be able to handle the trunk. And everybody takes their own food. There's no cafeteria on the ship. Everybody takes their own food. So what do you eat for weeks and weeks on end? You eat cheese, unrefrigerated cheese, which is the best way to eat cheese. And you just cut the mold off. Hardtack, which are hard biscuits. Mom has baked for weeks ahead of time. You just cut the mold off. Different standards of cleanliness. By the way, they would have come close to Rotterdam, where they're going to go. It took them 39 days to float north. In all those 39 days, I wonder how many times Magdalena's mom said, "Come back from the edge. Get away from the edge." You know, just moms just do that when the children get close to the edge of the raft. But Magdalena would have said, "What do I smell?" And her dad would have said, "That's the smell of a city." Cities in that time, I've told you this, stank. Everybody had sewer. You just dump in the streets. But it's also a fishing and sailing place, so you smell tar and fish and so on. But they got close. And Magdalena said, "Is this where we're going, a big ship?" "Yeah, we're going a big ship." And they got a little closer. The ship isn't quite as big. This group of Amish left on a ship called the Charming Nancy. Not much charming about it. The Stedman family, British sailing family, captained it. Charles Stedman was the captain. It was 160 feet long, about 60 feet wide, and he had a habit of packing it. There's 400 plus people on this ship. 400 people, including these 11 Amish families. And the sailors speak English, and most of these are immigrant Germans. They don't speak English, and so there's always animosity between. And they leave. Now, we know, for instance, that Charming Nancy had bunks for 180 people. The bunks are 18 inches wide, 5 feet long, and 18 inches of space between them. And sometimes below decks, they're 6 and 7 high. Now, 18 inches of space between, I'd get a little claustrophobic. And it took shifts sleeping or slept on the floor. Everybody brought their own food. And what do you do about bathroom facilities and stuff like that? I mean, think practically. Think about what this is. No kind of Laura Ingalls Wilder coasting to America. This is a hard thing. And they leave. They leave Rotterdam early in the morning. Now, the journeys across the Atlantic, we think of a sailing ship as this kind of upright. Good captains would lay their ships down nearly on the side like this, because then you could make way much faster. Think about what happens in the hold of the ship with these 100 or 400 people and the trunks and the children as the ship lays on its side and goes. They leave Rotterdam, and every boat coming to America has to stop on English soil. So at the top right, you see them leave Rotterdam, and they sail around the bottom of England and land in Plymouth, England. They left Rotterdam, and 9 days later landed in Plymouth, England. And they left England on July 13th. The Amish never left the ship because they're afraid of people stealing their goods. And so they never left the ship except for one thing. Now, here's where Hans Jacob Kaufmann's little diary comes in really handy. The second morning out, Magdalena would have come up on the deck of the ship, and she would have stopped. She would have seen this small group of Amish families standing at the rail of the ship. And then she would have snuck, children are, they sneak a little closer and look through the legs. What are they doing? And she would have stopped. And she would have seen a young Amish family, couple, kneeling down. And they have a piece of canvas. And there's a little child laying on that piece of canvas. And the mother is sewing that piece of canvas closed. And they put a stone in it. And Magdalena realizes that the playmate that she played with yesterday has died. Hans Jacob Kaufmann reaches in his jacket pocket, and he may have said something very similar to this. Gute Nacht, der meine Leben, gute Nacht, der meine Herzenfreund. That is used at Amish graves. And Magdalena would have watched as that young Amish family picked up the body of their child and dropped it into the hungry mouth of the ocean. Hans Jacob Kaufmann, the thing he records, when I read the diary the first time, I cried. Because the thing he records overwhelmingly is the amount of death. In all, in the time from July 29th, when they left Rotterdam, until they landed in Philadelphia on October 18th, he performed 26 funerals for these 24 of them were for children. What is it that makes you pick up your entire family? Knowing the risk. And take that risk. It has to be something more than just economic prosperity. It has to be thinking about the future. We want something better for our families. They left England on while they're in England, he says, "Today I buried 3 of my own children on English soil, never to see them again." We don't think like that anymore today. We don't realize the price they paid. They left England on July 13th, and for the next over 3 months, they're at sea. That's a long time. In the 3 months they were at sea, they saw 2 other ships. How do you know the captain's going the right way? The worst part is not the storm. They had some vicious storms. The worst part isn't the storms. The worst part is when the wind stops. And the ship gets quiet and still and hot. And people start dying. So they packed these ships full because the captains got paid for every live soul they landed at Philadelphia. And in some cases, they lost a third of the people on the Atlantic journey. So, and they knew it ahead of time. The people knew it ahead of time. But finally, Magdalena would have heard a sailor say, "Land ho!" And they would have gotten crowded close to the decks. And they would have sailed right up the Delaware River, into the Delaware Bay, up the Delaware River, and landed in Philadelphia in 1730s and 50s. Philadelphia is a small city, but it's the center of Quakers in America. And there, a few weeks later, and imagine what that was like. By the way, they went through immigration there. That's where the immigration agent writes down Y-E-T-T-E-R for the yellow. Yoder, that's on the ship. Phonetic spelling of yellow. They can't speak English, but somebody apparently meets them there, and they move west, 60 miles north and west of Philadelphia, and settle in Berks County, Pennsylvania. And there, a few weeks later, Benedict Lehman they're the only family of the 11 Amish families who didn't lose a child on the way to America. And he would have gathered his children together, and they would have said, "This is our land. We own this land." It is why we have this deep attachment to owning property in our world today. I have friends, English friends, who laugh at me and say, "Why would you want to own land? You just have to take care of it. Just rent. Let the landlord take care of all the problems." Anyway, we think differently than that. And Magdalena grows up there. When she's 18, she goes to an apple schnitzing one night, looks into the eyes of John Miller, and they get married. I don't know how it happened. He might have snuck over to her house and threw corn up against the bedroom window and said, "Kumaras." I don't know. Use your imagination a little bit because they're humans. They fell in love. They got married. She married John Miller, by the way. He was on the same ship, we've discovered. And when they initially built cabins, we think of this nice, spacious log cabin. No. This is what they built. This is the kind of thing they built. And then they said, later we'll build a house. We'll build a real house. But the first order of importance is a small place for us to live and then a barn. I found one property where they had a 18 by 22 cabin and a 26 by 44 barn. They had their priorities right, you know. But they needed to do that. And they settled in Berks County. And in 1757, this is some of the original settling in Berks County. In 1757, there's a war. And it's there where the Hostetler families live. They're neighbors to the John Miller. John and Magdalena are married by now. She's a 27-year-old Amish housewife with 4 young children of her own at this time. And the Native Americans attacked the Hostetler cabin. We don't have time to go into all that. But John got up early that morning, went out to chop wood, and he saw the band of Native Americans go with the 3 Hostetler, 2 boys and a father captive, and they took one shot at him, and the shot hit his hand, and it was gripped on the axe handle and deflected off the axe handle and crippled his hand. He became known as Crippled John or Indian John for the rest of his life. Now, what does Magdalena do that morning? We don't know for sure, but she might have run to her neighbors And she would have come into the clearing where the Hostetler family lived. They were a notch older than, they had 2 married children already. And she would have stopped because there she would have found the body. A small group of Amish people. And a little later that afternoon, as they buried her neighbor's wife, daughter, and a son, she would have heard those same words again. Gute Nacht, meine Leben. Gute Nacht, meine Herzensfreund. 1760s roll along, and there's talk of war again. War between England and the colonies. And the Millers and the Hostetlers and the people who are living in Berks County, this is right it's actually near Valley Forge. So they know, and both sides want their boys. So once again, they pick up roots and move on west to some land that the Penns have bought in western Pennsylvania in Somerset County, south of Pittsburgh, in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. And John and Magdalena make their final move and settle there. And this is his 224.5 acres he bought there. They would have probably built something like this. This is a cabin on an original, this is one of the original few pictures we have of an original cabin. Not the house in the background, this shack in the front. It's where they lived with their family. There in 1798, Magdalena's John died. And a few years later, her oldest son, whose name was Jake, came to her and said, Mommy, we're thinking about moving on west to the Ohio. And you know what Mommy said at that point? Why would you want to do that? And Jake would have reminded her, think about your own journey. Born in Germany, that horrendous journey across the Atlantic Ocean at 7 years old. And then having your own land and space and growing up there. And then that morning when her husband, that morning that shapes her life, the rest of her life, when her husband is crippled. It's a story all of its own. And then when the armies want her boys, they say, land is important, but it's not as important as our conscience. We will not fight. They move on west to get away from that. And it's John's descendants, John and Magdalena's descendants, who move, some of them move on west to Holmes County. Actually, all of their children ended up in Holmes County. 11 children who all grew to adulthood, and all of you are related to them. I can almost guarantee, maybe not Murph, but if you have any Miller blood anywhere in your Franschaft, it comes through this family. And so they're a representative family that allows us to think about life in that time period and the tremendous price that's paid by these people to give us what we have today. We should not worship what we have today. Maybe God will call us to follow our conscience and pick everything up we have and move. Maybe across the ocean. Who knows in our lifetime? But we have to be willing. And with these people, most of them are illiterate, can't read very well at all. But would they have been able to give you a fully orbed theology of what is making them do this? No, they wouldn't have. But they also knew that they have this deep commitment to follow Jesus. It comes out in some of the things they write and how they act, and their deep commitment to their family and giving their family something better. They would have said, the life you have today is what we came to America for. It's the price we paid, all the loss of life that we have, the price we paid for that is so you can have what you have today. It is very similar, and I'm not equating the Amish and Mennonites to the children of Israel, but we see these stories in Scripture where God takes people on a journey. And it's in that journey that they find God. And so in our own journeys and in our own lives as we look back, by the way, I did not know whether I was related. I knew Indian John and Magdalena were in my Franschaft. I was working on this when my grandmother died. I promise to leave you here in a minute. When my grandmother died, and I came back from the funeral. By the way, at that funeral, at the top of that hill in Fairview, my closest friend as a child, Merlin Miller, who's now the bishop of that district, reached into his jacket pocket and got out his Ausbund and said, Gute Nacht, meine Leben, Gute Nacht, meine Herzensfreund, as they put the body of my grandmother into the ground. And suddenly, I'd just been reading about this, suddenly there's this connection that goes way back. It's not what I worship. So we went back to New Haven. I needed to finish the project and decided to see if I'm related to Magdalena, how close I'm related. I knew I was. And Narita thought I had lost it. A few minutes later, I came pounding up the steps. I said, honey, I'm crying. I said, Magdalena is my great-great-great-great-grandmother on my Grandma Yoder's side, the one who had just died. And suddenly Magdalena had a face. She looked just like my Grandma Yoder. She looks like you. So in our stories of how God brought us to this place, what he's inviting us to is to the real home place. This is the picture of my grandparents' farm. And when I drive in that lane, there's something this is our home place. I find deep meaning in that, but not ultimate meaning. And in the same way that my dad was saying, Hemge, going home. It's like our journey with Jesus takes us to this place where we lose our connection to the earthly things and begin to focus on, I want to be a part of his kingdom. And so these people exemplify this by being willing to leave everything that they knew to come to a place so you can have the life you have today. Let's stand. Marvin, do you mind closing?
Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for